Last time we talked about the challenges of making flares from my flare mod emit light. That video as well as the mod showcase are available in the description, the playlist and in this pop-up thing. So, let's make the flare bounce. I've received a few comments about how great the bouncing works, but it's actually quite simple. When a flare hits a wall, we divide its velocity by 2 and we invert one of the axis components depending on the block face it hits. If a flare hits a block while having too little velocity, we stop it completely. And we also disable its gravity. If a flare gets in water or if the block below a flare changes, we re-enable its gravity. And while in water, a flare gets an upward momentum to float to the surface, like items do. Let's make a basic flare. It's a projectile entity similar to arrows, snowballs and XP bottles. It was a bad idea. See, creatures' collisions are calculated within its bounding box, while projectiles, despite also having a bounding box, are considered as a single point in collision calculations against blocks. Not an issue for other projectiles, which stop or get deleted upon contact, but this makes it so easy for a flare to phase inside or even through blocks. And apparently, it was way too cumbersome to fix it, and it would cause flares to eat even more performance away. So I've decided to simply leave this bug alone. Minecraft hates entities. Entity rendering is so bad, it deserves a dedicated video. Light updates are intrinsically expensive, especially in the quantities this mod produces, and the whole Minecraft entity system has a lot of overhead in general. So I had to do something. Step 1 was simple. Make a flare entity delete itself after a certain age, within its ticking logic. And while deleting expired flares certainly helps, once you stop throwing them that is, you still could cause a lot of lag while caving, not even on purpose. That's not even speaking about people who would intentionally spam flares to cause lag. But I guess they have other options available. So, we need the flare entity limiter. Let's say that only 50 flare entities per player should be allowed simultaneously by default, and when you throw the 51st flare, the oldest one should get deleted. But how should we keep track of them? We couldn't just store the oldest flare within the player himself, because entities can get unloaded and then loaded back at any time. However, we already store the owner and the age of the flare within the flare entity itself for other purposes, so we only needed to iterate over currently loaded flares efficiently to find the oldest flare per player. The naive implementation would be like this. When spawning a flare, add it to a collection associated with its owner, and when that flare gets deleted from the world, remove it from the collection as well. As we exceed the flare limit per player, compare the ages of flares within the player's collection by iterating over it, and delete the oldest flare. The issue is that, as I've said, Minecraft entities can be loaded and unloaded at any time. This makes accounting for all edge cases when a flare shall be added or removed from the collection, it would be a nightmare. The naive fix for this issue would be like this. Instead of a permanent collection we add flares to upon spawn, we dynamically track flares which are present during the current tick. So, each tick find all entities in all 3 worlds with the flare's entity type and combine them in one collection. Fortunately, all flares regardless of color or origin have the same entity type, meaning that one call for entities would be enough. Then split the collected flares into individual collections by their owners. flares which somehow don't have a valid owner will be handled as if null is just one extra player. And then, for each collection, check if it is bigger than the current limit, and if so, compare the ages of flares within the collections and delete the oldest flare within its collection. You know, it's not actually that bad. It is suboptimal, but it's only several hundred table entries at worst. It's a number any computer wouldn't even notice, despite iterating over each flare 4 times. But let's optimize it anyway. First, it's unclear how the getEntitiesByType function filters flares out of the rest of the game. It might just iterate over every single loaded entity and check its entity type. What if, instead, each flare, which already has custom ticking logic anyway, would just report itself to the limiter each tick? And then, instead of storing each flare in a collection, we immediately check if the newly reported flare is older than what is currently considered the oldest, and if it is, we store that flare as the oldest flare for that player. And at the same step, we also count how many flares owned by that player have reported themselves. Then, we iterate over online players and check if their flare counter went over the limit. If it did, we already know the oldest flare from the previous step and can delete it without extra computational work. And when we are done, we reset the limiter and go back to step 1. So far, we've been taking a look at how the flare entities emit light, how they move, and how the mod avoids the entity overload. In total, I've spent around 20 hours on these parts, out of 99 total. What gives? Or rather, what takes? We'll explore that in the next video, but before you go, because in these trying times anyone can get heated from any platform, please follow me not just on YouTube, but on as much social media as you can. Links are in the description.